Really, it's lovely to have such a turnout, so welcome to all of you. My name is Judith Pucci. I am one of many Tribute Center walking tour guides. So again, welcome to We Were There. It's a presentation of the 9/11 Tribute Center. What you're going to experience this afternoon is you're going to hear stories told to you by two of my fellow guides. These stories are different from many of the September 11th stories you hear because instead of dealing with the events that we all know well and that touched and changed all of our lives, these stories explore the personal costs of September 11th. So let me introduce you. Next to me are Caitlyn Langone and Donald Sadowy. Donald, the one at the end, Donald is a bomb squad detective. He is now retired, and he was a detective with the New York City Police Department for over 16 years. Many of you will remember that the first time the Trade Center was attacked was in 1993. A bomb was placed in a public parking garage below ground underneath the North Tower, which is the first tower attacked on September 11th. Donald is the man who uncovered the piece of evidence from the wreckage that allowed for the identification of the van in which the bomb was placed, and that then just cascaded and led to the terrorists who actually committed the act in 1993. After he retired in 2000, Donald became a security supervisor for Merrill Lynch, the financial services firm. Merrill had its New York City headquarters right across the street, across the West Side Highway. As for Caitlyn, she was all of 12 years old and in middle school on September 11th. Her father, Thomas Langone, was also a New York City police officer. He was part of the Emergency Services Unit. He was on the job in Queens that morning. When he and his partner were returning to their unit, they heard what was happening down here. They made an about face. They rushed into Manhattan. We're going to begin, though, with Donald, so I'm going to very briefly set the scene. All of Donald's training prepared him as much as possible, but prepared him for that day. Not only was he on the bomb squad, he served in the Marine Corps and in the United Nations security forces. When the first plane hit the North Tower, Donald left his office across the street at Merrill Lynch, and he went directly to the North Tower to investigate what was happening and to be of help. It's all yours, Donald.
Thank you. Just briefly, I began picking up the story from where she described me. I began exiting the North Tower from the lobby. I had many thoughts about what I had witnessed. Person set on fire like a Roman candle, fires in the lobby, people running upstairs, the evacuation of those who can get out did. Very quickly, a story you won't hear anywhere else. I personally witnessed some acts of heroism that I always feel compelled to mention. The elevator mechanics, the building engineers, they were told to leave 3 times. They were evacuating the last of those who can get out. They were told, grab your gear and your people and get out now. They said, this is our house. We left no one behind in 1993. We'll leave nobody behind today. We know places only a cat could get through. Boss, we'll call you on the radio when we get up there. And with a smile on their face, they picked up their rigging, their tool bags, their helmets and radios, and with a smile on their face, they marched up those stairs. I never saw those men again. This is what was going through my mind from all the other things that I had witnessed there. This was, take that moment in time on that day. We all know what happened now. But it was unraveling as I was there, as I witnessed it. I stepped out from the lobby over broken glass, and I was stepping over the bodies of the jumpers. And one fire chief who was there with us, not talking to anybody in particular, said, "How bad is it up there that that's a better choice?" The seriousness of this just was incredible. In contrast, it was such a beautiful morning, if you recall what the day was like. Not a cloud in the sky, sun was out, about 70 degrees. Then I heard this awful sound. It sounded like metal screaming. And unsolicited, I heard this from other survivors later on. It was the top of the south tower that began to break apart from where the plane hit it and above started to come down. I was already out into the street onto West Street, if you're familiar with the area from the North Tower. I was already out almost into one lane of traffic. I had to make a split-second decision. Where do I run to? What do I do? It's too far to run across the highway and the grassy knoll to get back to the World Financial Center where I worked for Merrill. Do I run back to the building? I'm running into the debris coming down. So I looked left, center, and right, and I saw all these abandoned emergency vehicles from different agencies. What caught my eye was to the right of me was the north pedestrian walkway. There was a short fire truck halfway underneath it. I figured if I can get to that truck, I have a good chance of surviving. Anywhere else, I wasn't going to be able to make it. People, men and women, were running and screaming. I started running for that truck. There were two gentlemen with me. I don't know who they were. I didn't know their names. But we just instinctively started moving together. One was a little to my left and behind me, and one was further behind me. We're all about the same age, about 30 pounds overweight, wearing expensive suits. I started heading toward the fire truck. Instinctively, they were with me running. We never spoke, but we apparently were of the same mind. Let's get to that fire truck as fast as we can. As I was running, the gentleman on my left, just one step over, two steps back, I heard he got hit with something, and I couldn't figure it out until about some time later. When the south tower, the upper portion, was breaking apart, what's the first thing coming down? Is the outer glass on the building. He was hit from his left collarbone to his right hip, and he was cut in half like a guillotine while we were running. I looked in that man's eyes, and I saw shock and horror. The things that saddened me the most about that day, there was nothing I could do for him or the other people who were around me who were being killed. I dove under the fire truck. The other gentleman running behind me, he just was about 20 feet short. He got hit by debris and taken down like a wave at the beach. Scared like I was never scared before in my life. Pray. I did some serious praying to God that day. I got up on the back of that truck. First thing I did was take off my suit jacket. I put it around my neck, around my arteries, and around my eyes and my temples. I pulled fire hoses down over my head and my shoulder. I remembered my heart is left center in my chest. Why do I remember this? This was my training from the Marine Corps. Make myself the smallest target as possible. I got down into a small ball. I was up on the back of the truck on a step, and I put my left side against the bulkhead at the back, and I was in for the ride of my life. Debris never hit me directly. It hit the north pedestrian walkway, and it hit the fire truck, and it just kind of lobbed over on me. All my injuries to this day, besides my lungs, are all physical injuries all along the right side of my body. I was buried alive. All I had was the ability to think. It's funny about the things, I had a 10-year-old from the Midwest ask me a question that many people think of, but they're too polite to ask. And we were just talking about this. Sir, what was it like when you thought you were going to die? I felt a series of emotions. I felt angry. I felt sad. I thought about my friends that I served with in all dangerous situations by choice. I'm a civilian now. I'm working for Merrill Lynch. These things aren't supposed to happen to me. I thought about the fact that my clothes were ripped on me, my wallet was gone, and my body would not be able to be identified for my family. And I'm wearing it today. It's a retirement ring. It's a miniature of my detective shield that members of my squad gave me when I retired. I was wearing this, and I took some solace in the fact that when they find my body, they'll find this ring. They'll tell detectives, and they'll be able to identify my body from my family. I prayed again, basically said, Lord, I did everything I could do. Whatever happens now, I'm in your hands. And at that point, I felt peace. And another building collapsed, and you all recall, whether you were here or not, the iconic pictures of that terrible toxic cloud over the city. I was in the center of that. I was on West Street, right at the foot of the North Tower, in the back of that fire truck underneath that pedestrian walkway. Everybody who was with me that day that I could recall was killed. I'm the only survivor, and I barely survived. I was actually found by accident when they were trying to salvage the rig later on. My body fell out. They were actually going to leave me there until they saw my hand move. I was blind. I couldn't walk. Whole right side, couldn't move anything. I was taken and carried down West Street to Vesey Street, which is just a short distance away, to 5 EMTs. All they had were their trauma bags because the ambulances were destroyed. They took me, and I could hear them whispering, holding me, and I couldn't see because I was temporarily blind. And they said, I remember feeling the breath on one person. He was so close to me, and they were trying to hold me so gently as I couldn't stand. And the thing that I remember most was that they said, we're EMTs. We have you. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. It was the best thing I could hear from anybody. They laid me down on the street going toward the water, and I had so much of that toxic particles in my mouth that I couldn't breathe. They had to use a glove and scoop it out of my mouth, and they had to suction me. And they had to clear my airway, my nose, my ears, my eyes. About a week later, I felt compelled for someone to drive me back down to the site. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't drive a car. But I felt compelled to come back here. There's a church right off the site, St. Paul's Episcopal Church. I asked a relative to drive me and just drop me off, and I used a cane to get down the street. There wasn't hundreds, there were thousands of people here with homemade posters of their loved one, asking, did anybody see my husband, my wife, my son, my daughter, my sister, my brother? I would tell you it was one of the lowest points in my life. The fence line around the church, you couldn't see the fence because there was all these posters, homemade posters with photographs of loved ones. I wanted to go into the church, and I just couldn't get in. The line was all the way out the door. And there were members of different clergy from different faiths that had come down to try to comfort people. And I remember this one member of the clergy, very tall, very distinctive voice, probably in his late 60s, came up behind me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he was speaking to everyone. But I felt like he was speaking to me also. He put his hand on my shoulder. I was standing there crying profusely. And the words that he said really comforted me. But I was kind of like numb. And I guess he sensed this, and he wrote something down, and he gently stuck it in my pocket. And he placed his hand on me again, and he walked through the crowd, comforting people. And it really was the beginning for me of coming back. And what he placed in my pocket was a quote from the Bible. And I'd like to share that with you now. It's Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Thank you.
By this point that morning, Caitlyn's father had arrived here at the Trade Center. Thousands of people at this point are streaming out of those towers. And of course, her father does the opposite. He runs into the South Tower, which was the second building attacked that morning.
So there is a saying in the NYPD that when people need help, they call the police. But when the police need help, they call the emergency services unit. And it's kind of like the Rambo squad of the NYPD. They do anything and everything crazy, awesome, and amazing. And that was the unit that my dad was in. And it was very fitting for him to be in that unit because saving people and helping people was something that really drove his entire life. He was not just a NYPD ESU officer, he was also a volunteer firefighter and firefighting instructor and an EMT in our hometown on Long Island. And for me, when I was small, my dad was very much like Superman. He was really, really tall to me, like 6'2", larger than life, with these big hands. When we play football, he used to say, hands like frying pans, because they were so big. And when I was small, I could only hold his ring finger and his pinky when we'd go across the street. And he was invincible to me. And when in 1995, he went to the Oklahoma City bombing. And I remember watching that on TV. So a few years later in 2001, on September 11th, I'm sitting in my favorite class in all of school, my science class. It's my favorite because I have the nicest teacher. She's always really upbeat and positive, and she lets us goof off before class. She's the best. And I remember her a lot too because she's always smiling. But the thing that really stuck out for me that morning was the principal comes into the room with a letter. She goes over to my teacher and they talk amongst themselves for a moment. And my teacher comes back into the front of the room and the smile that is always on her face is gone. And she looks really serious and really upset. And she says to my class, a plane has just hit the World Trade Center. And that's all she said. She wouldn't turn on the television and we all had 1,000 questions. But one thing that only came to my mind was, how does a plane hit something 110 stories tall? I thought it was a small plane, something tragic but manageable, and no doubt I knew Daddy would be there because that's what he does. So I went through the rest of my school day not really understanding or even knowing the full scope of the tragedy. And I get to my lunch, and there's a girl at the end of my lunch table, and she is hysterically crying. Her face is red, she has tears streaming down her face, and she is inconsolable because her dad works for an investment firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, on the 104th floor of the North Tower. And Mary Ellen is distraught. And I'm not particularly close friends with her. We're not that we dislike each other, but we're not bonded. But seeing her so upset made me feel so awful and so sad for her. So I went over to her, I said, Mary Ellen, don't worry. People like my dad are coming. They'll go up into the towers, they'll get him, they'll take him out. No one will be left alone, they'll get them. It'll be okay. Don't worry. And I really believed everything I said because I had no reason not to. I finally get home and I turn on the television and I'm finally seeing what all the other Americans have been seeing all day. And I remember at 12 thinking all the paper coming down out of the towers looked like snow. My brother gets home from elementary school and we're talking in a buzz about what's going on. And I remember my mom being very eagerly quiet. Far later that night, we get a knock at the door. The NYPD is a paramilitary organization in so much that if something happens to you in the line of duty, they will not call. They will send a representative to the door to inform you. So they come to the door at midnight, my dad's partner, and they say, Tommy didn't show up for roll call. But we don't know where he is, but we're looking. There's a lot going on down there. It's a big, messy scene. We don't know where he is, but we're looking. Don't worry. A lot of don't worry. About a week or so later, we're at my grandmother's house, my dad's mom, and the firemen and the police officers come to the door and they say, don't worry, we're digging. We're looking, we're digging, we're searching. There's air pockets, there's voids, there's somewhere they could be. We're digging. And I held out hope for a while because my dad was a collapse-based rescue specialist. So I thought, if anybody's down there, it's going to be Daddy with a piece of chalk and a chalkboard telling all the other survivors a schematic how we're going to get out of the building in one piece. So it was about a month after we get the we're digging news that it comes to be pretty clear that Daddy and my uncle, who was a firefighter in Squad 252, are not coming home. In fact, they had been lost. My father was in the South Tower when it collapsed. My Uncle Peter was in the North Tower when it collapsed. So we decided in October to have a joint family funeral at our church on Long Island. There's a firefighting tradition that when you pass fire trucks, they will raise their ladders and drape an American flag between them. And we must have passed through about 2 miles of fire trucks doing this from the funeral home to the church. And I remember getting to the church at 12 and seeing blue uniforms for as far as I could see. Police officers and firefighters from New York, from all over the country and all over the world had come to pay their respects for my dad and my uncle. And it wasn't until I left the church and I was standing outside watching the helicopters fly by in the missing man formation that I finally understood what really had happened. And I understood that my dad was gone forever. I can't talk to him. I can't hear his voice ever again. I can't see him. I can't hug him or touch him or hold his hand anymore. That he is no longer here. And it was a very, very hard thing to understand when you're 12, the finality of death. But children are very resilient, and they are a lot tougher sometimes than we give them credit for. And I learned this firsthand. So I made it through. I went through some therapy. I started volunteering at the Tribute Center, and then I wanted to find my calling. So I said to myself, Caitlyn, you're certainly not brave enough to be chasing people with guns or running into burning buildings. So that's right out. But what can I do that could help people and honor what Daddy taught me to do, which is to always help? Well, me and Dad really like dogs. That's something we bonded over a lot. He used to tell me about the search and rescue canines when he would do his FEMA jobs, and I thought that was so amazing. I found there's a school in California called Bergen University of Canine Studies. It's the first and only school of its kind where you can go to learn how to train service dogs. I'm currently attending there to get a master's degree in canine life sciences so I can train service dogs to help our elderly folk to keep them out of their retirement home so they can stay home with their family and their friends and live a positive life that way. Because, I just want to give a lot of love and a lot of support back to the world somehow because I got a lot of love and support from you guys. And the one thought I would like to leave you with is moving on doesn't mean you're forgetting somebody important to you. It just means that you're taking everything that they gave you in life, all their love, their support, their knowledge, their wisdom, and you incorporate it into yourself, and then you go out and you be the best person you can be. Thank you.
You just saw a photograph of Thomas Langone. The first time that Caitlyn and I did a tour together, she said to me after the tour, do you want to see a photograph? I said, yeah. So she takes out her phone. The first thing I did was, whoa, this was one handsome man. Caitlyn is one of over 3,000 children who lost a parent that day. Her father received the highest honor that any New York City any New York City police officer can be given. He was posthumously awarded the department's Medal of Honor. Now, that day, the first responders in this city, police, fire, suffered massive losses, unprecedented. 23 New York City police officers were killed. 14 of them were, like Caitlyn's father, members of the emergency services unit. And as I just told you, they were not alone. 37 Port Authority police were killed, and 343 New York City firefighters were killed that morning. We're running just a little tight. I was going to eliminate the Q&A, which I hate doing, so let's do one or two quick questions if anyone has them. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon.
Good
I'm
afternoon.
from Italy. Of course, me, just like many others, we all remember, where we were and what we were doing. And the journalist said, Italian journalist, I don't know if it came out of America, but they said that America, the US, that day, you lost your innocence. Is this something that, is it true or is it just an idea from journalists?
Interesting question. Either of you want to take it or shall I?
Because it's a crucial day. Before that day, things, they even told us, okay, you're going to New York, but it's not the same as it was before the the 11th of September. So I was just wondering, those things have changed a lot, but how much and how deep? And I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
In terms of a loss of innocence, I suppose in some way, but you know, America has been through 2 world wars. We've had experiences. We had Pearl Harbor, but yes, this was the second time that we were attacked on American soil. And what was unique about it was that the people who were targeted and killed were not in the armed services. They were you, they were me. The only thing they did wrong that day was to get up and go to work. It's changed this country, it's changed the world, it certainly has changed New York City. On a daily basis, I don't think you really get a feel or a sense of that. Human nature goes back to the dailiness of life. And to a large extent, that is an excellent thing to do because you have to continue to live your life. Under the surface, though, if something should happen in this city, again, even not of the same magnitude, but still something, there will be a reawakening of the scar of September 11th. So it did change the mindset of America, and it changed the way in which all of us throughout the world function.
Could I just add?
Please, Don.
Add to that. I was a lead investigator in the attack in '93. Their intention, which they tried to do, they took a truck full of high explosives and drove it in and blew it up below the surface to try to make the building fall, the North Tower into the South Tower, killing everyone in it, both buildings. That was their intent. Only 7 people, and I don't mean this lightly, 7 people, innocent people, lost their life that day. It caused a lot of physical damage. For us in law enforcement, it was a big wake-up call. To us, not so much the population, but to us, that was the wake-up call because this was the first time a terrorist attack from overseas happened here in New York City in the United States. So from my perspective of being a detective in law enforcement, our antennas were up after that if it happened once, it can happen again. And the building was rebuilt and everybody went back to their lives. But for us, it was always in the back of our head that we can be hit again. So for us in law enforcement, that was our wake-up call, February 26, 1993. Of course, this was a much, much bigger attack with much more loss of life. But for us in law enforcement, we were looking down the road that there possibly could be another attack.
That's an important distinction. I was speaking very much from a civilian point of
Yeah.
view. And I tend to merge 93 and 2001. And so when I said September 11th is the first time we were attacked on American soil, of course there was 1993 as well. What we're going to do is, if you have any other questions, outside the exit, that's the way we will all go out, we'll be out there. So please feel free. We'd be very happy to talk to all of you longer. We just have run out of time now. So I want to thank both of you very much for doing this. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's excellent that you do it. I would also just like to close by thanking all of you. And it's not going to be, I think, for the reason you're anticipating. It's not just a polite thank you. You probably don't realize this, but you are actually essential to our storytelling because it is with you that we take a piece of a brutal day and we do what we've just done with it. We share it, and by sharing it, we actually turn this horror into a life-affirming experience. And for that, we thank you very much.